Okay, sir. I started recording. So I'm going to present a topic on pangenomes, which is still under development. The idea is to have more the upcoming masters and PhD students think about it, get involved into genomics and bioinformatics work. This is my introduction with Dr. VLN Reddy sir in 2004 at San Diego at a conference. And that's me, little lean. And this is VLN Reddy sir. So this is how I got introduced to the entire group here. So as sir already mentioned about me, I did my BS Agriculture. Then I went to US to do a master's in plant breeding. But due to some funding issues, I had to move to a different lab where the professor was working on genomics and bioinformatics. So I got introduced there. So I worked there for 7 years. And in the same lab, I continued my work as a research scientist / postdoctoral research associate for about 5 years. During that time, I used to teach masters and PhD students on genomics and bioinformatics. At that time, I was the only bioinformatician in the department, and I used to help many other groups. So that led me to have a better knowledge on various other crops other than the crop I was working on. And from 2015, I have been working at Hudson Alpha Institute for Biotechnology, which is a pioneer in genomic research. As all of you are aware, genomics started with the study of human genome that started in the early 1990s. Our group as such has contributed about 25% of the whole genome. Then my present director, my present supervisor were members at Stanford, from where they contributed the 25% of the whole genome. So I'm proud to say that we're the pioneers in genomics research. And after many years of genomics research, as you know, it's not just publishing papers or providing databases. We need to use that. So for that, in humans, we started the first clinic on genomic medicine in the world. It's the first of its kind. The idea is if the doctors cannot diagnose a particular disease or a problem, they come to us and we sequence that particular genome of that child along with his or her parents and try to identify the aberrations or variants in the genome that's causing that. Once we identify that, based on previous, say, multiple studies, could it be association mapping or functional studies or QTL studies, we try to identify what the problem is. And as far as my memory goes, from the last 4 years, we had about 200 kids that have been diagnosed with a certain problem that were not diagnosed by the simple tests or not by any doctor possible. My publications, the peer-reviewed journals, I have about 47 published and 3 accepted. I'm a lead author on a Nature paper. I'm a first author on Nature Biotech and a Nature Genetics paper too. And I have many other papers in top-notch journals. And I have around 2,800 citations and a H-index of 24. As sir mentioned, I have a bit of teaching experience, a bit of research experience and workshops. I'm an editor on PLOS One and a guest editor on Frontiers. And recently, I, along with a friend, has started a bioengine plant science journal, which is free to publish. The idea is to get plant science research freely available to everyone. So free to submit, free to read. No paywalls, it's all continuously run by volunteers, and I'm the chief editor on that. And I had mentored a few masters and PhD students, and I have around 50 presentations on international platforms. I have visited Africa, South America, North America, and many other countries where I have presented my work over the years. So before we go to the main topic of pangenome, which is still under study, I just want to go step back one step where I want to define whole genome sequencing and how we go with that and what do we achieve from that and why do we need to go further with the pangenome. First of all, whole genome sequencing refers to determining the complete DNA sequence. So it could be chromosomal DNA and organelle or DNA like mitochondria, chloroplast in case of plants. So the end product is a FASTA file that has a greater than symbol, a chromosome number, and 4 alphabets ATGC. And if we don't know the particular nucleotide, we give it as an N. So it's basically 5 nucleotides that make up our entire file. But to achieve this file, there is a lot of money, time involved to get this product. And I'll briefly talk about those things in a minute. So let me hide this so that sorry about this. I'm trying to hide this toolbar. So the question that comes is, so why do we need a whole genome sequencing? You know, in plant community, we use marker-assisted selection a lot. So where that is used for molecular marker discovery, association mappings, biparental mappings, identifying candidate genes. These are in general the plant studies on the molecular side that we have been doing over the last 20, 30 years. We started using RFLPs, RAPIDs, SSRs, and now SNPs, Indels, and other marker systems. The idea of this marker-assisted selection is to reduce the time and the effort to generate a new hybrid or better lines. So basically, once we identify markers that are related to a trait, we use those markers to screen populations to screen them in the field. The advantage of this is we can reduce the number of generations required to develop a hybrid or a variety. At the same time, it can reduce the number of samples that had to be replanted in the field. Let's assume I have around 500 plants that have to be planted in the field, but using marker-assisted selection or using markers, I could narrow it down to 100 samples. That saves a lot of effort and money for phenotyping. And the other thing is functional studies. So the functional studies like gene silencing, CRISPR-Cas9s. For all of these, we need to know the location of the genes or location of the markers or location of the QTL, for which we need the whole genome sequencing. And at the same time, we have over years, we have multiple QTL studies or association mapping studies where we have some QTLs map that are associated with traits. But the problem is they're based on biparental populations, and we end up having, say, the same QTL present on linkage group 1 in one population, linkage group 3 in other population. But theoretically, this could be the same. So once we have a reference genome, we'll be able to define, hey, on chromosome 1, this is the position for this, and on chromosome 1, for a different population, this is the position. So we can do a comparative study, or we can relate whether it's the same QTL that's present in other populations. And at the same time, having a whole genome sequence information, we could compare among different species. For example, soybean with bean, and so the same with vigna or sicer or chickpeas or whatever. So all the legumes can be compared, or all the grasses can be compared, so on. So that makes it a necessity to get the whole genome sequence of an organism. As a simple example, this is one of my recent paper published in Nature Biotech, where we used CRISPR-Cas9 to identify a gene that is responsible for seed shattering in Setaria viridis. Based on association mapping, we identified a gene on 5th chromosome at a particular position that is responsible for shattering. And it encodes for a transcription factor. And based on sequence information from multiple samples, we were able to say that a polymorphism G to T is causing a larger effect. This is causing an amino acid substitution that is leading to less shattering for the same wild type or the same sample. To confirm this, if this is the gene responsible for that, we did a CRISPR-Cas9 to create additional alleles. Basically, we have the wild allele that is highly shattering, and using CRISPR-Cas9, when we created additional alleles, we had an allele called CRISPR1 where an adenine insertion happened, leading to a frame shift mutation. That leads to a different amino acid and a different protein completely, and that completely abolished gene function, creating non-shattering plants. And to further confirm that this is the one, we made a cross and we were able to get a 3:1 ratio in the F2 generation to confirm the same thing. So basically, we have the wild allele, which is high in shattering. And then we have a CRISPR line where we had a frameshift mutation that leads to low shattering. And we have a domesticated form of Setaria viridis called as Setaria italica. And in there, we have a copia element, a few kps inserted between the two MIB domains, and that leads to very low shattering. And as you are aware, in all the grain species, shattering is a big problem, and we're able to confirm that this is the gene responsible for shattering in Setaria species. If a lab experiment to confirm the same, this is the on the left, you see the tensile strength over time. So if you look at the blue allele, by 18 days, there was complete shattering, or the tensile strength was very low. Whereas the orange one, which is the CRISPR allele, the tensile strength stayed strong until the 29th day after the grain formation. And on the left, we have two panicles. Excuse me, someone has to mute their audio. Okay. And in the middle picture, the left two panicles represent the CRISPR alleles, which are non-shattering. On the right, you see the shattering original wild-type allele. And this is a seed dispersal based on a wind tunnel experiment. As you could see, the orange ones, the number of seeds dispersed is very low, whereas the blue ones, the wild-type allele, the dispersal is a bit higher. So with this, we know that we need a whole genome sequencing of an organism. Just stepping back a little, if you look at the history of it, in plants, the whole genome sequencing started with the release of Arabidopsis thaliana and rice in 2000 and 2002 respectively. From then, we have been sequencing multiple organisms, and so far we have about 250 genomes. And this is our sister organization, so a part of JGI, where we have all the whole genome sequences, annotations available, which is called as Phytosome. You could freely download that. And of the 250 genomes sequenced so far, you could see 200 genomes have been assembled by our group. So what are the steps involved for this whole genome sequencing? Basically, there are two parts in whole genome sequencing. One is the assembly, the other is the annotation. Assembly is you have your sequence reads, they're assembled into short contigs, which are a few kilobase pairs, and then they're assembled into scaffolds, generally in megabase pairs, and then into finer chromosomes. And once we get the entire chromosomes, we describe where the various genomic elements are, like where the genes are, what are the intron and exon boundaries, where are the transcription factors, silencers, promoters, starter boxes, whatnot, every possible things. At the same time, we have non-coding things like regulatory elements, repeats, telomeres. So basically, we mark everything. Say chromosome 1 to 1 MB, we have it's a telomere. 1 MB to 2 MB, you have 3 genes and you have these repeats, you have this. So every part of your genome is marked with certain kind of element. So the first part is, if you want to sequence a new organism, we need to know what the genome is. We need to know the genome size using flow cytometry or a Kramer distribution. We need to know the repeat content. We need to know the heterozygosity content. We need to know the ploidy, diploid, tetraploid, or polyploid. At the same time, we need to know the GC content. Unless we know this, we cannot define the sequencing strategy. So basically, we need a trial run or a test run to determine how much sequencing has to be done or what technology has to be used. As an example, a quick thing, I have been mentioning K-mers. K-mers are nothing but short strands of DNA. So in this particular, this is a K-mer of 3 base pairs, ATG, TGC, GCG, so on. But in reality, we use a K-mer size of 75 or more or even 100 base pairs. So this is what a K-mer distribution looks like. So the homozygous peak C represents the size of the genome. If the heterozygous peak here, right here, is higher, it means it's not an inbred. There is a bit of heterozygostic content leading to assembly issues. In this case, we need to go for long read sequencing. So based on various contents of this peak, we determine what sequencing technology has to be used and at what depth. And here repeats, if they are low, that's fine. But if they're high, we need to go with a higher depth of sequencing. And this is a typical example of a recent switchgrass sample. We have octoploids and tetraploids. If you see the peak in octoploids, you see at 100, whereas in tetraploids, it's around 75. So based on these two graphs, we'll be able to get majority of our genome size, repeat contents, heterozygosity, ploidies, and even GC contents. And then we need high quality DNA, generally 100 kilobase pairs or more. And for sample selection, we need fresh tissue, inbreds preferably because they are low in heterozygotes. And there should be chemical purity and no contamination from any other cross-contamination from other species or other things. And the third step that goes into is sequencing. So basically, this is determining the nucleic acid sequence or the order of nucleotides. Basically, we have short reads that are 75 to 150 base pairs, paired end reads which are about 150 to 300 base pairs, and long reads which are 1 kilo base pair to 2 mega base pairs. In terms of history, it started in 1980s using manual slab gels, where it used to take a day or two just to determine 100 base pairs. Now we are in third generation sequencing, sequencing 1 trillion bases each day. And this is the chemistry. The initial chemistry in the first generation was basically taking fragments, cloning them, amplifying using PCRs or some bags or yaks, and sequencing them. It used to take 2 to 3 days to get 500 base per fragment. And in the second generation, you have each fragment, millions of fragments read at the same time, giving millions of reads at the same time. Now we are at the third generation sequencing, where it takes a single strand of DNA, a longer fragment, and sequences it continuously, giving us a larger DNA sequence. So right now we are using the second generation and third generation frequently for initial discovery studies. And the first generation Sanger sequencing is still used to confirm a few things. As I mentioned in our genomic medicine, once we identify a particular variant or a structural variant, we still do Sanger sequencing to confirm that that is true. So in general, we're using all the 3 technologies now. And the cost of sequencing, the initial cost was about $3 billion. And now we're at a stage of $100. But this is not for, the $100 is not for the assembly purpose. It is just 1x or just 3 GB of sample. It cannot be used for assembly, or it cannot be used for variant calling, or it cannot be used for marker discovery. And the present day sequencers, we have many of them based on the amount of data we need. And in our lab, we mostly use the NovoSeq, which generates 6 terabytes of data in about a day or two, with 20 billion reads and a read length of about 500 base pairs. Excuse me, ma'am, could you please mute your mic?
Who is having the number 957433? Please mute the mic.
Sujan, you can mute all because you are the host now.
Sir, Sujan, sir, you can mute all now.
Okay, I'm not. Okay.
There is a provision.
Unfortunately, couldn't, sir. That's the issue.
Okay, leave it.
957433.
So now we have been using the NovoSeq that generates 6 terabytes of data in a day or two. And now we have the ion torrent 2 that generates about 2 million to 80 million reads in about 4 hours. And we have PacBioSQL 2, which is used for long read sequencing that we use in our lab mostly. It can generate reads up to 30 kilobase pairs each read. And initially when this started, we had only 80-85% of accuracy. But with advanced chemistry, now which we call it as CCS, circular consensus sequencing, or hi-fi reads, we have an accuracy of 99.9%. So reads obtained from this are used for assembly. So here a simple, we have amplicons, we get ligate adapters, and we sequence continuously some 8 to 10 times the same circular DNA, such that we get a long read without any errors. And we have Oxford nanopores. The beauty of these devices are they're as small as a flash drive. The Minion is a flash drive, whereas MidGion just fits to your phone, and it can even process your data there. It just like a drop of blood, it needs a drop of decent DNA, and it can produce sequence even on your phone. And the read length is up to 2 megabase pair, and the yield is about 2 GB to 8 terabytes based on the device which we use. And once we have the sequence, we need a lot of computational resources. So we need a high performance computing or a cloud-based computing system. And the amount of system resources needed depends upon the data, genome size, heterozygosity rate, and ploidy. And it can increase geometrically if it is an all-by-all comparison, meaning if we have thousands of contigs, it has to compare each and every contig against each other. So that's more. So the more reads, more contigs, the more resources we need. As an example, if we have a diploid, highly homozygous genome of 1 GB, we need about 96 CPU cores, 1 TB of RAM, and 3 TB of local storage at different stages to get the final assembly of 1 GB. And coming to the main step of genome assembly, we have short read genome assembly, which was before, and now we use long read genome assembly. And once we're done with assembly, we use assembly polishing, and then we use scaffolding and gap filling. So basically on the right, you see you have short reads. If there is an overlap, it combines into shorter contigs, which are a few kilobase pairs in length. And these contigs are placed into scaffolds based on other set of sequencing called mate pairs or backs. And these scaffolds, which are at the higher end of kilobase pairs or the lower end of megabase pairs, are assembled into chromosomes using a genetic map. So basically you have say this scaffold has marker 1 and this scaffold has marker 2. So we know based on genetic map, M2 comes after M1. So we place this scaffold, and next we place this scaffold. So we need to, for each scaffold, if we have 2 or 3 markers, that way we will be able to align our scaffolds into chromosomes. But once we align our scaffolds, there are certain gaps in between which were not sequenced. We just place an N. In general, our lab uses 5,000 Ns, but in real, the length could be 5 KB or less or more, depends. So as you could see, we need a very good genetic map with a few thousand markers to achieve this. So the main problem with the short read assembly, I mean, all the initial Rice, Arabidopsis, and until 2015, most of them were short read assemblies. There were a few gaps in the sense like we had only 85% to 90% of the genome. Even humans, it was only 90%. It's only 3 months back, we got 100% without any gaps because of heterozygous conditions and many other issues that go into assembly. And it is hard to resolve repeats, and we need to have a decent genetic map. And if we have polyploids, highly heterozygous species, it becomes hard. And at the same time, if we have structural variants, it is hard to. I will explain a few of these in the next few slides. And again, if we have only limited number of markers, we might end up having inverted fragments. If it is just one marker, we don't know if it is 5' to 3' or 3' to 5' that fits on the chromosome. But if we have 2 markers and the order of them, we know whether it is 5' to 3' or 3' to 5'. So I mentioned structural variants. which is a hot topic right now in the genomics world. Basically, we have multiple kinds of structural variants. Let's assume we have a reference genome with 3 genes. You can have an insertion where if one other gene is present, you can have a deletion, inversion, copy number variants, duplicates, translocations, and many other genomic rearrangements, which all need long read sequencing to solve it if you're doing the reference genome. Basically, over the years, we have been saying that all the genomes are 99.9% similar, including humans. That is true only if you consider at the SNP level. But once we start looking at the structural variant level, the percentage of similarity is low. I don't have the real exact number, but I believe it's around 70 to 80% only similar because of all these structural variants. And quite frankly, structural variants are still being resolved in many species, and I don't think there is a species that has been accurately and highly determined with all the structural variants possible. So with long read sequencing, basically we have little issues with repeats, tandem duplicates, structural variants can be resolved. Haplotype phasing is easy. Phasing refers to, right, as you know, your DNA is made up of 2 strands. One is maternal, one is paternal. So phasing refers to identifying which fragment or which strand is from maternal and paternal. If it is short read sequencing, you end up merging multiple fragments. So it could be one from paternal, one from maternal. But with long read sequencing, you get the entire 5' to 3' as maternal and 3' to 5' as paternal. That's the advantage of long read sequencing. And you can have a better mapping certainty. The speed of assembly is really good. As an example, on PacBio assembly, if it takes about 15 days to 1 month, your short read assembly used to take a couple of months to and even more computational resources, as it has to compare millions, hundreds of millions of sequences, everything with everything. But here the biggest problem is getting the obtaining high quality long stranded DNA. I mentioned repeats. This simple example that shows that if your read length is less than the repeat length, see in this particular case, we have ABC 3 genes and we have repeats in between. So it's not able to resolve where this repeats falls, whether it's between these two or after or whatnot. But if it is a long read assembly, we're easily able to resolve because it has overlap with the genes on either side, or not only genes, any other elements, and it's easy to resolve that. So this is a simple graphical representation of short read assembly and long read assembly. As you could see, the short read assembly all by all comparison is slower, not accurate, whereas long read assembly all by all comparison is faster and it's better and accurate. And recently, from the last 3 to 4 years, we have been using a new sequencing technology called as Hi-C sequencing, which is predicting the 3-dimensional chromosome structure. This mainly helps to have all the scaffolds organized into chromosomes, or a better order of it. Basically, it allows the interactions between fragments or on between different chromosomes. There are multiple these chromosome conformation technologies, but most of the time we use Hi-C for genome assembly purpose. I don't want to go into more details of this. And once we get the final assembly, it's not complete. We need to do polishing and error correction. So all these softwares, whenever they build a sequence, they build a sequence based on consensus. So based on consensus, sorry about that. Based on consensus, you might have a nucleotide N. Basically, it's some ATGC. So using some polishing and error correction techniques, or which is more and more Illumina sequencing, we're able to determine that G, and this N will be replaced by G by the software. So right now, as we produce many whole genome sequences using PacBio, the outline would be, we need to get good DNA, we need to assess the genome, mostly using a K-mer distribution, which is on your right. And then we generate high quality PacBio libraries and sequence, which is generally 40 to 50x. And if it is outbred, we need more. Here X refers to, let's assume our genome is 1 GB. In that case, we need 40 to 50 GB data, which we call it as 40 to 50x. So it's basically the times the genome size. And we assemble the genome using softwares like MiCat, Canoe, and then we use a Arrow software to polish the genome. So basically you have your DNA, you have your fragments, and they're assembled this way. And then there could be some false joins. So we try to break them using, false joints, nothing but they're placed in the wrong place. So, if the genetic map is not matching the scaffolds or not matching your order of context, we call them as false joins. Then we integrate those chromosomes using Hi-C data. And if we have any haplotype assembly overlaps issues, we solve them. And then we finally polish with Illumina to solve that issue. So how do we, well, if you read a whole genome paper, how do we, or if you do a whole genome assembly, how do we know whether a genome is complete or not? There are a few statistics. One of them is contig N50, the other is scaffold N50. They should be higher and the gaps should be lower. So if the gaps is like 1% or less than that, that is reasonable. If the gaps are 20% or 10%, that's something to be considered nowadays. And once we start about N50, on the right here is an example. Basically, N50 refers to the length of the contig, which are sorted, that makes up half of the genome. So in this particular case, all the total length is 320 base pairs, and your 50% is 160. So it is at that 70 that crosses 160. So in the N50 is 70. The higher, the better. And there is another stat called as L50. It is the number of contigs that make up the first half of the genome. So that would be 6. So once we have the complete assembly, we need to build annotations. So we need to have higher N50s. And here we use gene prediction softwares, and we use mRNA and EST evidences to build over that. And then we use protein evidence against other species or related species. And using all these things, we build our gene models. And recently with the advent of long-read sequencing, even RNA sequencing or cDNA sequencing, we do on a PacBio machine, which is called as isosequencing. Basically, you get a complete gene as a single read, so less errors or less assembly issues. So here is a big pipeline. Basically, we can have a non-FL read, complete full-length reads or non-full-length reads. The non-full-length reads are again assembled, and these two are combined to make into multiple transcripts or multiple genes. So this is a simple example of RNA-seq platforms. We have a gene and a couple of transcripts. When you have short-read DNA, it's sometimes hard to resolve this. Whereas if you have long-read cDNA or direct RNA sequencing, in a single stretch, you can get your approximate 3 to 4 kilobase per gene as a single stretch. So once we define where the, other than that, so basically we need software methods which uses signals like Tata box, start site as ATG, your intron boundaries as GT, AG, so on. You have all these signals. And at the same time, you have coding has higher GC content, non-coding has higher AT content. Using these signals, we have ab initio or software predicting softwares. At the same time, you have ESTs and RNA support. At the same time, you have multiple databases, protein databases we compare against. So we combine all these things to get the final gene products. Again, this is about a month work for the whole genome, and it takes a lot of resources. And once we get the complete gene predictions, let's say for a species, we have 30,000 genes. We determine what are the domains, motifs in that using different databases like NCBI, CDDs, PFAMs, others. And we define orthology using KEGS, EGNOGS, phylums, others. Homology search is comparing with other species. And Go terms, KEGG pathways, what's the possible gene name and where is it involved based on available previous literature. That's all this functional annotation stands for. But in reality, this is a simple picture showing where we stand in terms of annotation. We have all the transcripts, but only some of them have blast hits because maybe they're unique to this particular species, and only some of these have meaningful annotations, and within this meaningful annotations, you have only few of them that have a known pathway. So there is a lot of functional stuff that has to be done in the coming years. As an example, if you take 30,000 genes, I would say about 15 to 20,000 genes only have annotation. The other 10,000 genes are right now we are saying we have mRNA evidence, but we don't know where they are involved. We just say expressed protein, that's it. So the functional studies in the next few years would be based on what those 10,000 genes are. This is a recent Nature paper where I was one of the first author on this. Just quickly want to show what all we did over the last 8 years of this. Basically, switchgrass Panicum variegatum is a tetraploid, so it has 2 copies of the genome, and it could even be 6x, nx, and different kinds. This is a native biofuel. This is a native grass of US. It's used for biofuel. It grows it has a very high biomass. So it's one of interest to the US government or the Department of Energy. But at the same time, this is an outbreed. So you would expect a high heterozygosity and not exactly a complete homozygous condition or a better assembly. It's a large gene of 1.1 GB. It's highly repetitive. It's a polyploid. It's heterozygous. So we used synteny with Panicum hallei and F2 genetic map to order the scaffolds onto chromosomes. A quick thing, we had Illumina sequencing about 177x coverage, which are 500 base pairs in length, and we have PacBio, which are 10 kilobase pairs in length, 83x. So overall 260x sequence was used for the assembly. And we got a contigent 50 of 5.5 megabase pairs, which is good. So just as a comparison, the previous assembly, which we call it as a V4 assembly, had for a single chromosome, we had 4,800 contigs. So there were a few issues in the ordering too, but whereas the recent advanced V5 thing only has 33 contigs that make up chromosome 1. And for the annotation purposes, we used 3 billion reads from 88 libraries and 18 conditions. So these basically refers to leaf, root, flower, buds, drought, urea treated, various conditions and various tissues to get, because not every gene is expressed in every tissue and in every situation. So the idea is to get many genes and as many genes as possible. And in addition, we used PacBio isosequencing, where we can get a single gene completely in a single shot, 4.5 million reads for 9 conditions. And we ended having 80,000 primary transcripts and for about 50,000 alternate transcripts. And out of this 130,000, we had RNA support for only 70,000. The other 60,000 were based on mRNA evidence, were based on either the prediction softwares or comparison with the other softwares. Or the idea is like, we don't have all the conditions sequenced here, so maybe those genes are expressed there. As I said, the functional approaches or the functional study forms the next core of genomics for the next 10-15 years. So coming to our main topic today, pangenome. So basically it is the sum total of all genes in a species. The idea is, so far we have been thinking that the single nucleotide polymorphisms and small indels are responsible for phenotypic variation. And that is the reason we have been saying 99% of the genome is same, or only 1% is different, that is causing the phenotypic changes. But over years, once we started sequencing multiple organisms, multiple samples, we started realizing that not necessarily every sample has all the genes. As an example, one sample can have 30,000 genes, the other sample can have only 29,000 genes. So it is this presence and absence of these 1,000 genes that are also determining the phenotypic variation. So idea of pangenome is to get a collective or a complete information of all the genes in a species. There are the complete sum of genes can be divided into 2 groups, core genome and dispensable genome. Core genes are present in each and every sample, whereas dispensable genes are only present in certain samples or certain subpopulations or species. And basically these are responsible for local adaptation to environment or the phenotypic variation among groups of same thing in different places. As an example, if you take rice from China, Japan, India, so there are thousands of shell genes that make up their differences between the quality of the rice and everything. Let's talk about them in a minute. So this is a graphical representation of a pan gene. As you could see, the pink and the green genes are present in all the three samples. So that forms the core gene, whereas the other yellow, blue, and purple gene forms the dispensable genome. And this purple one is a unique gene that is present in only one sample. It's not only at the gene level, we can look at the intergenic exon and the intron level to find the core genome and the dispensable genome. The idea of pangenome is the collective representation of all this. This is just a graphical representation, but we're still in the process of determining the exact or the better format that fits all needs. So basically there are two kinds, draft pangenome and complete pangenome. Draft pangenome refers to conflict level assembly, and we use short reads at a higher depth like 40x or 50x to get contig assembly and determine whether the gene is present or absent. And whereas complete pangenome is, we do chromosome level assembly, so we need long reads, we need the entire process of just thinking to be a different organism or a new organism, and we do the complete assembly and then compare among each other. I'll show you the examples. In general, for the draft pangenome, which we have been working so far, we take a set of samples, we use a software called as HipMark to assemble them into contigs, that we use the reference genes to align them into contigs and say if it's present or absent in that particular sample. Then based on the reference genome, we order and orient them into chromosomes, and we identify core genes and shell genes. And these could be used just like an SNP marker to identify do jivas or to identify adaptation or many other things. As an example, this is a Brachypodium genome with 54 samples. On an average, we have 92x for each of the sample, and the mean assembled genome was 268. If you look at the figure on the left, your genic region is also variable. You could see these few examples there, and your non-genic region is highly variable based on the samples we took. So far, I mean, the 5 years or even before that, we have been thinking that it's the same in all the genomes, but it has proven to be not true. Here is a region on a chromosome. It's a 35 kilo, it's a, this is here a 100 kilobase per region. On the left, this phylogenetic tree represents, there are two groups of Brachypodium, sorry. And this is the sequence for each one of them. If you align them, which is your right side picture, you could see the bottom 4 samples don't have this particular gene, whatever the gene name is. So they don't have this gene. So phenotypically, they could be different because of absence of this particular gene. For Brachypodium, instead of core and dispensable, even we use 4 criteria. Core is genes present in all the samples or all the lines. Soft core is genes present in 95 to 98% of the samples. And then we have shell and cloud genes, which are present in low numbers. In Brachypodium, we have the reference genes are only 36,000, whereas the pan genes, which means which are unique to other samples or groups of samples, there are about 24 or 25,000 more genes which are not present in the reference genome. And here is a quick example on how they break up. We have 13,000 core genes, which is 1/3, and the others are shell and soft core and other genes. This is another example of draft pangenome Setaria viridis. So basically, we had a North American collection of 598 samples. We had about 40x sequencing, and the contact length was 60 kilobase pairs, and we had about 38,500 genes over 38,500 genes. And using them as markers themselves, we were able to distinguish between the 3 subpopulations present in US. And we have about 35,000 core genes and 3,000 shell genes. This is the representation of the 3,000 shell genes, presence and absence. And if you look at the chromosome level, if you look at the presence and absence, this is a chromosome 8. You could see there is a cluster of genes that are overrepresented in upper Midwest, whereas they're completely absent in Rockies. So Rockies refers to left side of US, mostly the mountainous region, and the upper Midwest is more fertile, more growing areas. So this particular set of genes could be involved in traits that differentiate between these two subpopulations. As I said, these could be used as markers to identify subpopulation structures and some basic population studies. And we found 1679 genes not found in the reference. And in the reference, as an example, we have 38,000 gene models. That is the draft pangenome. Coming to the real pangenome, this is in cotton. We did 5 species of cotton. And fortunately or unfortunately, these cotton genomes are really 99.9% similar, not only at the SNP level, even at the structural variant levels. They're highly similar with very few structural variants. Here, since it's a tetraploid, you have H subgenome and D subgenome, except a few places of structural variations. Few places of structural variance, these colored things. The rest of the genome is highly similar. And if you look at the number of genes using the same criteria and everything, we see the number of genes varies between 2 to 5,000 genes are present, absent, because cotton is highly similar. But if you look at other species, they're a bit diverse or variable. So the question comes, what could be the sources of new genes? Here is this a typical theoretical example. There could be a whole genome duplication followed by loss of some genes and some retaining, some silencing, some of those genes getting a new function, so on. At the same time, you can have tandem duplications, TE-mediated insertions, de novo gene bursts, segmental duplications, introgressions, and horizontal gene transfer from different species. So these all lead to novel genes that could lead to different phenotypic or different adaptations. So once we have multiple genomes, how do we represent them? So as we know, our reference genomes are represented as a FASTA file. Your sequence is represented as a FASTQ file. You have your SNPs represented as a VCF file. You have standard formats so that everyone could understand that. At the same time, it's easy for the writing or developing new softwares. But for pangenome, we are still in the process of identifying a decent way to represent these pangenomes. The one problem with pangenomes is, as an example, let's assume we have a reference and we have 4 new samples. When you consider pangenomes, you compare everything with everything. Let's assume we have a delta new sample added to that. At the genomic level, it's no big issue. We can simply compare a reference and the new genome. But at the pangenomic level, you have to make 5 extra comparisons. Let's think if you have 100 samples. At the genomic level, it's just 100 comparisons with the reference genome. At the pangenomic level, it's 100 by 100 comparison, which takes a lot of time and a lot of resources. So one way of representing them is a linear representation, and the other is a graphical representation. In the linear representation, we are saying that this is only present in ACD samples, and this is present in only BC samples, and so on. In the graphical representation, we have showing 2 pathways of the 2 possibilities. If we have multiple pathways, it shows multiple possibilities. And this is more likely the theoretical concepts that different groups are working on to standardize a format. So here is one other example. So you have a reference and unaligned sequences. When you do the sequence alignment, you end up having deletions or new genes or core genes, everything identified. The same thing can be represented as 3 different things: de Bruijn graph, directed genome graph, bidirected genome graph. I don't want to go into the details of that. It's just 3 different ways of representations. And this is a new format, GFA, graphical fragment assembly, that's gaining popularity. So this is a sequence that is present in everything. These are the two possibilities of the sequences, where second one has A, third one has G, so on. This is only representation of a few SNPs, but once we have a few indels, the format changes. We're still working on how to represent structural variants, tandem duplicates, so on. So there is a lot of room. I would say the next 10, 15 years would be a lot of functional studies and a lot of pan-genome stuff to better represent it, better use it. So anyone planning for further studies could choose those topics. This is a theoretical perspective of a super pan-genome. So basically, within each species, we identify core genes and dispensable genes or shell genes and combine all the organisms like, say, Arabidopsis, Brassica, cotton, tomato, every other species. We can get a core genome of all the plant kingdom, which could be just a few hundred genes or a few thousand genes. Again, this is just a theoretical concept. We have now not worked on this because not many species have whole genomes at the pan-genome level sequenced. So the question comes, what are the applications, or why do we need a pan-genome? First of all, the presence-absence variation, whether a gene is present or absent, can be used as a marker for GWAS and population studies. And if we have more genes, we could have more functional studies. At the same time, we can have more isoforms or alternative transcripts of a gene. And at the same time, we can have a better understanding on the evolution and the phenotype-genotype relationship. And as I said, this is still work in progress. How do we do variant calling? So far, for SNPs or indels or any other kind of variants, we'll just take a reference, take all of our samples, map to that, identify our SNPs. But once we have a pan-genome, or what if we have 10 references, what should we align against? Because alignment calling SNPs is a big pipeline which takes days and days or weeks and weeks. So how do we represent that? I'm actively working on that part right now. And at the same time, how do we infer precise haplotypes for pan-genomes and metagenomes? How do we express our transcriptomics, or how do we, it's basically how do we combine data from multiple sources into a useful format. So with that, I'd like to thank my group at Hudson Alpha. Jeremy Ishmers and Jane are my group leaders. They have been leading the plant group from the last 10, 12 years. They are part of around 200 plant genomes sequenced and around 400 to 500 Nature publications as corresponding and lead authors. And my Bean group that I did my PhD and postdoc, Switchgrass group, where I got a chance to work as a first author in a paper, and the Setaria group at Donald Danforth Institute, where I got a chance to work with them on Setaria italica. And with that, this is my group. On the right, it's mostly the wet lab group. On the left, it's mostly the bioinformatics or the informatics group. We're a group of 8 people, where 2 people are completely involved with the sequencing and assembly. I deal with the population genomics. 1 person deals with the transcriptomics, and all others, k-mer distributions, pan genomes, and other things. We kind of distribute the work among others, and each one of us is expert in each field. And with that, I'm open for questions.
Now the presentation is over.
Yes, sir.
Open for discussion. Any queries from the participants? Any clarifications needed? Because he's having rich experience in omics.
Sujan, Dr. Sujan, it is a so nice presentation. It really, you have taken us to the pan-genome new world, since working only single genomes and variations. Really, it's a fascinating story. So when the reference genome, crops which have reference genome, it is okay, the pan-genome can come quickly. What about the genomes which still not assembled? Some of the minor crops, millets.
Exactly, sir. They have to be worked out And we have all these funding issues. Unless it's a real crop that has some significance, it's so hard to get funding. But if it is a crop of high significance, we can get easy funding for pangenomes. But as you said, it's definitely necessary to sequence even a single reference genome. If anyone is interested, we're happy to collaborate and help get that genome out.
Hello, Sujan. This is
Sir.
VLN Reddy.
Sir.
Very nice presentation.
Thank you,
So
sir.
it's really entire world. It's a different world for all of us. So my question is, so far in any crops or any organism, complete pangenome is available?
No, sir. So far, I'm talking only about the eukaryotes, prokaryotes, like bacteria is a complete different scenario. They have been working on the pangenomes from the last 10 years, I would say. In eukaryotes, in plants right now, we have about 10 crops that have around 100 samples each that are sequenced. They're still at the draft pangenome, sir. At the complete pangenome, we really, downstream, all we are able to say so far is this: we have these core genes and these shell genes. They have not been applied further for any other things. Right now, I would say we're still in the data dump stage. We're still developing methods and things so that we could efficiently and effectively use the resources.
So in rice, around 3,000 genomes are available.
Yes, sir. All pangenomes.
Still pangenome is not prepared, right?
So it's all draft pangenomes, sir. Rice, we have, I might be wrong, but I think we have close to 30 genomes that have been completely assembled to the chromosome scale. Independently assembled to the chromosome scale. The thing is, they add more samples and they just say, we have this many core genes and this many shell genes. These shell genes are could be involved with this period, nothing more. Say, for example, I'm working with, as you are working with rice, for example, you have your population, 100 samples. Which reference should you use? What is your use for the pangenome? Or how could you use pangenome effectively is a different question.
See, in the rice, if you see the natural germplasm, there is no donor sources for many diseases. Like sheath blight you take, there is no natural variation in the germplasm.
Yes, sir.
Maybe in that case, we can look for some of the important genes through pangenome or so.
Exactly, sir. Basically, we need to map it to a different distant relative. So, for example, you're using the MSU version of indica. Maybe you need to use some Nipanbori or other variety or a Rufipagan or something. Maybe you will be able to identify more variants in the region of interest.
In the chart box, one question has come: is the dispensable genome is influenced by epigenetics?
We don't know yet. We're still in the process of determining that.
And how to quantify allele doses?
Can you be clear on what do you mean by allele doses?
I don't know who is Achu. I don't know who is that.
Hi, sir. I'm PhD student from ISR Tirupati. Achu. I post allele doses. So regarding for example, the X gene has how many copies and what is the dosage effect in the polyploid?
Okay, so you mean nulliplex, simpleplex, quadruplex, so on.
Yeah, exactly.
So at the gene level, it's so hard. But if we have if we have long read sequencing, if we have long read sequencing, we might be able to resolve that.
Okay. Does it require?
But in general, quantitative genetics, we have approaches to do that. Based on the ratios we get, we can determine that. But at the sequencing level, because so far the sequencing approach for SNP calling and everything are developed for diploids. So if you go with allele doses, nulliplex, quadruplex, all those things, it just says heterozygous for everything. Okay. In switchgrass, we're in the process of determining a procedure based on a simple chi-square test to determine what kind of alleles is it.
Okay, okay. Thank you, thank you.
So which platform can be used for pangenome? Nanopore or PacBio is better?
We are using PacBio, sir.
Okay. What about
But Nanopore is comparatively cheap if we are talking about a few samples and a few fragments, because the machine itself is only $1,000, 70,000 rupees approximately,
okay.
whereas PacBio is in millions.
So people telling about the sequencing error rate in case of PacBio is getting reduced, or still you have issues on the
The early 2014-15, it was 80 to 85, sir. Now using CCS reads, we have 99.99% accuracy, sir.
So do you think that the due course the PacBio will replace other platform like Illumina short read sequence?
No, sir. Because with PacBio, the amount of data produced is small. Nowadays, we use PacBio for whole genome assemblies. For resequencing, marker identification, and all others, we use Illumina, because that can produce 6 terabytes of data in a day for multiple samples together, and it's cheaper, sir.
So what about the computational algorithms which you face easy for PacBio? With Illumina, it is more difficult for cantic alignment.
Yes, sir. If it is at the assembly level, PacBio is a lot easier, because comparing each against each, at PacBio, you are only talking about a few thousand, whereas Illumina, you are talking about a few millions of them, comparing each against each, so that you can find a decent overlap.
So still computational challenges are there.
Oh, yes, sir. For PacBio, they're less. For Illumina, it's a lot, sir, at the assembly scale. But if it is for variant calling, identification of markers, population studies, quantitative studies, Illumina is easy and lot better, sir.
So one question from chat box. What are the tools used for pangenome assembly?
See, if it is a draft pangenome, there are multiple things. For the draft pangenome, I would be using, let me quickly show you that. For the draft pangenome, we use HipMer to assemble reads into context, and we use BLAT to align reference genes to context. But whereas for the complete assembly, for a complete whole genome assembly, we use MeCAT, Canoe for assembly, we use Arrow for polish. And these are, there are a few Python codes that we have in-house that we wrote over time. That should be it. And again, for each species, based on the heterozygous content, repeat content, we write new softwares, or we enhance the existing softwares.
So any other questions from students or scientists?
If anyone is interested to learn more, you could approach me through LinkedIn.
Sir, there is some question somebody is asking.
Sorry.
Vikas.
Yes, sir. Good morning, sir.
Hi, good morning.
Sir, actually, I'm a MSc student from Tamil Nadu Agriculture University. Actually, I would like to ask you, sir, which is the better approach for drug designing, genome-based drug designing, sir? Pangenome or whole genome, sir?
Well, I'm not into drug design, so I cannot answer your answer accurately. So I don't want to create confusion. But in general, so far, drug design in humans is restricted to the single reference genome.
Okay, sir.
But in theory, if we can have, so because the reference genome is not a representative of the Indian population, so using a pangenome might be a better approach.
Okay, sir. That's what in human, we are talking about medicine, but while as an agriculture graduate, we think about our pesticides and all, sir. That's what I'm asking.
Yeah, definitely. We need, for example, if you sequence a tomato from US, that's different from the tomatoes we grow there, right? So having a reference genome for that particular tomato or using all the tomatoes might be a better approach, definitely.
Thanks a lot, sir.
So one more question here. Can you please enlighten optical mapping in haploid phasing by Achu only?
What do you mean by enlighten?
I mean, I don't know whether you covered this optical mapping like bionanogenomics method for applied phasing. So so we are new to that.
Okay.
How
So
this
basically, optical mapping using by nanopore technologies or PacBio technologies, it's the same long read. Because they are long reads, we can get the phasing or accurately, meaning like we will be able to determine the strand is maternal or paternal, or the other way to say is we can have all maternal fragments attached together and paternal fragments attached together in an easy way. Whereas with Illumina short read sequencing, that's not possible. I just mentioned the technologies, PacBio technology and and nanopore technologies. I just mentioned as long reads rather than using the word optical mapping.
So is it possible to differentiate if, for example, 3 copies of genome is there, for example, triploid. So we can figure it out. This is haploid 1, 2, 3 like that. Is it
Yes,
possible?
we can. In switchgrass, we were able to, where we had 2 copies because it's a 4x. And right now we're working on assembly of an 8x genome, which has 4 copies of it. And in cotton, which is a tetraploid, we're able to significantly do for 2 copies.
So we can resolve at the subgenome.
Yes, but only using long read sequencing.
Okay.
Any questions?
Miss Shanti, could you mute your mic? Yeah, sorry, I was able to.
So, Sujan, can you type your email ID in the chat box?
Sure, sir.
So that if any doubts are there, they can contact you directly.
That's my email address. If any one of you are interested for working on this, not only pangenome, any of the genomic stuff further, and if you have a good interest and a decent computer to work with, because we have a lot of data dumps in the databases and not everything is used, we could use them without spending money. So all we need is an interest to work on your topic and some time you could dedicate. We could always have new things discovered from the existing data, and we can have publications. If anyone is interested for such collaborations, feel free to write to me or VLN Reddy sir, and we'll be happy to collaborate together to get a project or a paper out.
So there are no questions, sir. Shall I start vote of thanks, sir? Dr. Reddy, sir?
Yes, if there are no questions, we can.
Okay.
Any more questions?
Any questions from students, staff?
Please. Students? Okay.
Okay, sir. So,
Please go ahead with the vote of thanks.
okay, sir. A very good morning, everyone. I am Professor and Head, Department of Molecular Biology and Biotechnology, SVAG College, Tirupati. I am here to present the vote of thanks for today's guest lecture. I would like to thank our guest lecturer, speaker, Dr. Sujan Mamidi, Senior Scientist, Computational Biology, Hudson Alpha Institute of Biotechnology, Huntsville, Alabama, USA, for enlightening us with his knowledge and experience. Today's lecture was full of knowledge and interesting things. It gave deep insights into the topic and also revealed some interesting facts. I'm pretty sure the precious knowledge that Dr. Sujan gave us will definitely help us in further research and education. So once again, I would like to thank Dr. Sujan for taking time out of his busy schedule and enlightening us with his knowledge. Thank you very much. So I would like to thank our Honorable Vice Chancellor, Dr. A. Vishnuvardhan Reddy Garu, and Dean of Agriculture, Dr. A. Pratap Kumar Reddy Garu, and Dean of PG Studies, Dr. Balguru Garu, and other university officers for giving permission to organize this lecture. I am grateful to our beloved Associate Dean, Dr. B. Ravindranath Reddy Garu, for his constant support to make this event a very grand success. So I also thank Professor and Head Dr. D. Loknath Reddy and other staff members of the Department of Genetics and Plant Breeding and staff of my own department, that is Department of Molecular Biology and Biotechnology. I want to thank all the students and staff of our university and other universities, institutions across the country present here for paying attention and learning and to make this event successful. I also thank all those who assisted directly or indirectly to make this event successful. So, thank you, Dr. Sujan, once again.
Thank you, sir. It's a pleasure representing at Angru, my home institute, I would say, still the home institute. I'm so happy for having VLN Reddy, sir, meeting after him a long time. Thank you, sir, for having me. It's indeed a big pleasure to me. Thank you all for attending, and feel free to drop me an email in case you have something, or add me on your LinkedIn profile so that you can send any further queries. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. And
Thank you, sir.
all the participants.
Thank you, sir. Thank you all.
Thank you all.